sometimes envy is not about the lack of self-knowledge, right? Because sometimes when we're in a space of envy, we are envying someone else because we feel like we lack something, right? We feel like this person has something that we don't possess. And sometimes envy is not a lack of self-knowledge, but a lack of acknowledgement for ourselves and what we've been through. So forth. And so it just really creates a really hard-heartedness in us, and we're not really able to move forward. And, you know, the problem with this, and that was my whole purpose of referencing everything that I just said in the earlier episode, in the earlier half of this episode, was to just let you guys know, like, you have to look at your life and your history as a Black person, and you have to see, wow, my grandparents did that. This is like what we're seeing today is everything that they fought for. What we're seeing today is everything that they, like everything they've endured, and do we have a long way to go? Yes, but look how far, man, the resiliency, to see Black people in certain positions, to see the doors open and to see the windows of opportunity, to see God really pouring out those blessings, right? I give all the glory to God. I mean, personally, I grew up, my grandfather was in the war. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. And for me, I always had this mindset of like, if they were able to do that then, there's no excuse. There is absolutely no excuse for me not to do what I need to do today. You know what I mean? And that was just my mindset because that was the level of exposure. But let's look back at all of our grandparents during that time, right? Black people were very much aware of the importance of community. They were aware of the importance of, finances and things like that. There wasn't all of this distraction in terms of entertainment, right? So we had really sound core values that created foundations for businesses to thrive, that created foundations for families to prosper. And so when I look back over everything that my grandparents had multiple properties. They had homes. I just said that, but they had churches. They owned a church. They had multiple businesses. They owned a farm that was in Indiana, and all coming from everything that they've seen, migration, that's crazy. When I look back over everything that they were able to do. So when I enter into this space in my life, I say, no, there is no limitations. And again, like I said, I know for a lot of people, you're starting at the bottom. It's really hard, and I'll never take away from that. I think that's a conversation we're going to have on another day. Cause honey, that's a lot to unpack, right? There's so much context in that, but like, being a Black person growing up poor is very hard. Poverty is a very hard thing. It's really hard to overcome psychologically, because even still to this day, I get on this podcast, I read my books, I do the things I got to do, but I'm not there yet. I'm not where I want to be. I've had entrepreneurs in my family who have had, good businesses, but have made some poor financial choices. So it's like, I didn't grow up in money. I didn't grow up seeing that, So it's just like, it's a lot to really overcome. Like, you really do get it out the mud, but I can honestly say it's just something that is so self-fulfilling about your hard work that just really doesn't go unnoticed. And the thing about envy, especially today, because we have this overexposure to the lives of others, people we don't know, their personal lives, their X, Y, and Z, right? But nobody really knows the story of a person, right? Today, a lot of people get online, they get on the podcast, they talk about this, they talk about that, they talk about women, they talk about men, and you never really hear conversation centering around, okay, what is this person's childhood? What is this person's relationship like with their background or with their parents or whatever that gives them the qualifications to talk about these things, right? So now it creates this sense of envy because this person's kind of painting this mask of perfection. So you start to look at yourself like, yo, I'm lacking in all these different areas when this person's merely riding off of a fantasy, something they've never been exposed to. You see what I'm saying? So it creates this disconnect. And the thing about envy, especially today, is that everyone was striving for this life of grandiosity. I think it's because of representation. It's like you see something and you start to feel like, wow, this is possible. And even though that may be true, we negate the work, we negate the preparation, we negate God's timeline for our lives for that specific thing, right? And so when that happens, we find ourselves in situations where we're envious, where we're upset, we're feeling like we're lacking in something. And the truth is that we're just failing to acknowledge all that we've been through on our journey. I think individuality is something that is sacred. I value individuality. I value authenticity. There are many times in my life where I had to catch myself because I started to feel like, dang, it's different, especially living today. I talk about everyone's pursuit for this life of grandiosity, which is nothing wrong with that. I think that that's something just like when you're young, you have steam, you have energy. Like why not go after your dreams? Why not, create a life that's worth living for you and whatever that looks like to your capacity, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Especially being that the window of opportunity is there. We're breaking all the rules, man. Like, I just think that we're doing it so different. I'm so grateful to be alive. And I'm going to pause for a second and really want you guys to sit with that too. Like, if you're listening to this, like, you should be so grateful to be alive because the opportunities are there. The way things used to be done and ran, it's all being rewritten, so it's like we're writing it as we go. I know a lot of times we talk about the negative effects of social media and so forth, and we can go on and on about that. But on a more lighter note, social media, the technology, engineering, the whole thing, right, in terms of science and technology, is that it has given us this freaking powerhouse of like opportunity. You know what I mean? It's insane. I even think for myself, like to be able to really be a writer and to be doing the things that I do all from home. I could do it from my bed. I don't have to get up and try to print some newspapers. Now that would be fun. There's been times where I feel like I had to scale back because I've implemented old strategies in the new world, like trying to do everything by legwork. And that's not always the case. Now, for me personally, I like the legwork because I feel like I can feel myself doing the hard work, but times are changing. So I think it's just one of those things where it's like there's some negative effects, but there are so many positive effects. And I think when we sit with that space, it's like, take the time to really consider like your ancestors, like they would be booming right now because they wouldn't be taking no for an answer. They wouldn't be making excuses. I think from a psychological standpoint, America is tough. We have material comfort, and this is on Bobo's Void. I love that podcast. It's like one of my favorites. The content is great. I don't, agree with everything, but the content is great. It's philosophical. And they just talked about how, living in a third world country, there is deprivation of materialism, right? There's no safety. There's no, comfort in that sense. But here we have the material comfort, but we also have the psychological distress and the anguish and the anxiety and so forth. And so there's a little bit, I think that that's something to consider, like what would you rather have? Would you rather have the driving tools or, you know what I mean? So I don't want to veer too far left. But my point is there's resiliency that is embedded in each and every one of us in our bloodline. Each and every one of us, whether you're starting something from the bottom, whether you've been doing it for a few years. I know for myself, I had to really shift my mindset and come to this space, this point of realization where I realized for myself, like, you got to give yourself more credit, because when you look online, sometimes people go viral. At this point in my life, I wouldn't even say that it would be a blessing. I think, again, it depends on God's timing for your life. But I would say that it's not a blessing and you shouldn't focus on going viral, just because it's like, man, there's really something said about preparation. There's something said about being in such a space in your life where you really take the time to be cultivated and like you get stronger, you get better, you get more, you know what I mean? And when I think about even now and all the times previously in my life, I don't think I would have been ready for that. You know what I mean? It's so much that comes with it. I think with every blessing, there's a little bit of a burden. So it's like you just kind of, want to be mindful of what you're asking for, especially before the time. And it really won't make a difference because God's not going to give it to you anyway, which is a good thing, right? He's a great father. So stepping back, things that happen quickly, it's fake. I was just tapped into, it was a commentator. I cannot think of her YouTube channel. She's a great commentator. She was just kind of talking about culture. She was talking about the dudes over, I'm not gonna reference their name because I don't know. Maybe on a Patreon. But there's this podcast where these two black dudes, they sit and they just kind of give a lot of business advice and so forth. And, there was evidence that came out about their podcast and how they have hosted several guests who have come on there talking about credit and all these different things, but these men were frauds, right? These business people that they brought onto the podcast, they were doing fraud. And it just made me realize, even for myself in my own life, how many people are willing to just cheat their way ahead And it is just like, so, you know, when I step back and I realize that, like with envy and things like that, you just got to realize, like, stay your course, you know, because things just don't happen like that. And like, I think it took a little bit of maturity for me to kind of realize that too, even with my podcast and everything I'm doing in my life. Like, it just took some maturity for me to kind of step back and be like, yo, like, things don't really happen like that in life. You know, you're doing something for 3 years, you don't even get a degree within 3 years. I mean, you could, but like 9 times out of 10, you was putting in work in high school. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you there's no skipping steps. And like, people who want to appear like they got something that they don't, they often willing to skip steps. And it's like, at this point, it's a lack of integrity, it's a lack of morality. And, you know, that's something that we're seeing today as well. You know, I wrote about that in my book Seasons. Check that out. Okay, JalenLeslie.com. Go cop that. I wrote about how in 2020, like, you know, I was noticing that morals and values were no longer a thing. And that's what we have today. You know, people are willing to do whatever just to kind of appear to other people, or, you know, come off like they got something that they really don't. And so it's like, you don't really want to envy that. And I've met people who are self-proclaimed self-help experts who ain't even doing the work in their own life. You know, you meet these people and it's like, they're nowhere near whole. They're nowhere near happy. They're nowhere near sound as they appear or, you know, claim to be. So it's just something to consider. So that's the conversational envy, and I would like to end by stating, you just never know what goes on behind closed doors. You know, where I working in the credit industry, it's very interesting because you have people who are $500,000 in debt, all based on materialism, you know? So yeah, just be mindful, you know, so many smoke and mirrors, but there's some people who, you know, do well for themselves. Those people are typically older because it takes time to be good at anything. Peace.